Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second session together. Today, we will talk about longitudinal research and its application in teaching practices. This is the overview of today's session. First, we will do a very short recap of needs analysis, and this is something that we did together last time. Then we will dive into the question, what is longitudinal research? What is longitudinal research in language teaching specifically? Why longitudinal research is important for language teaching? How can it be done? Advantages and disadvantages of longitudinal research. And finally, I will give you homework for our next session, which is next week. So let's start with a very quick recap of needs analysis. First of all, needs analysis is used to determine what we want to put in the course. It is a crucial aspect of language teaching that helps you as a teacher to understand specific needs of your students. Therefore, teachers base their teaching, so the materials they use and select, their teaching practices, and so on what their students need in order to learn the language. Why is it important in language teaching? We discussed relevance, maximizing learning, and personalized learning. Now, how can we as teacher conduct needs analysis? Well, there are indeed different ways of doing this. Perhaps a safe way of conducting needs analysis would be to follow the steps of initial assessment, identifying learning objectives, analyzing learning contexts, and collaborating with different stakeholders in education, such as our students' parents, head teachers, principals, and so on, and implementing self-reflecting practices, which is always one of the crucial points and issues when it comes to any teaching, but especially for language teaching. Now, let's see what is longitudinal research. So, longitudinal research encompasses studying individuals, so in our case, individual students or groups, so groups of students, over an extended period of time. This extended period of time can be weeks or months or years, and this will depend on what you want to find out. Okay. Longitudinal research is usually conducted in order to track changes and development that occur within the group or individuals that you're studying. It employs continuous or repeated investigations. So imagine that you want to implement something in your teaching and you want to see how well it works when it comes to your students' success in learning a language, and you track their development perhaps over several weeks or months or years, and you repeat what you wanted to investigate in the first place. You repeat it continuously over this period of time, and then in the end, you can find out the results of your study. Longitudinal research is generally observational in nature. It can also be experimental. However, qualitative or quantitative data are typically collected. Okay, so you can ask your students for interviews, you can do a short questionnaire with them, and so on, but you also do observe changes, you observe your students, and you are in this way trying to track any changes in development of your students' level of proficiency. Longitudinal research is considered a type of a correlational research, as researchers first collect and then investigate relationship between gathered variables. And an important point is that we really try to not manipulate the data. This means that we, as teachers and as researchers, are trying to collect data as objectively as possible. And when we do this, we try not to manipulate it in any way, but we try to analyze the data as they are. Okay, so no changing them. Finally, for this very slide, I would say that typically longitudinal research is used and conducted in medicine and economics. However, it also found its purpose in social sciences, and that's why we are talking about it today. It is very, very useful in language teaching as well. Now, this slide is to visually present how a longitudinal study can look like. So essentially, we employ same parameters over a certain period of time. So we conduct research with the same group of people or individuals across a certain period of time. Okay, so as you can see here, this is just a cutout, let's say, of longitudinal research that has been repeated 3 times, and how many times you will repeat your intervention or any kinds of questions, any kinds of questionnaires, etc. That really depends again on what you want to find out, and it depends on your research design. However, this slide is only to visually present how a longitudinal study looks like, so that you can also imagine visually how it looks like. The next point for us today is a discussion or a task, as you can see here. So if we were doing this synchronously, I would ask you to think about the question below and discuss it with your colleagues. However, given that you will be listening to this from your homes, I would like you to pause the video and really think about the following. You can also make notes if you want, and once you're finished, then you can continue. So the questions are: do you have any experience with longitudinal studies? Really anything. For example, has anyone conducted it with you as a student, if you remember? Do you know anyone who is conducting such research, and so on? I want you to really think of anything you know already about longitudinal studies before you continue with the video, where I will reveal some further pieces of information about longitudinal studies. So, now that we understand what longitudinal research is in general, let's see what it means for teaching. In teaching, longitudinal studies include data collection over certain periods of time in order to observe different changes, development, and trends in educational contexts. In such contexts, longitudinal research aims to understand different ways in which various factors impact learning outcomes over time. So, by different factors, we mean instructional practices, environmental influences, student characteristics, etc. Therefore, longitudinal research can provide valuable insights into the long-term effectiveness, but also sustainability of educational interventions. So with conducting longitudinal research, we can really understand what works and what doesn't. For our students, we can understand our teaching environment, our teaching contexts better, and therefore, if you remember, we can really maximize learning, and this is something that we covered in the needs analysis session. We actually did that last week. So with longitudinal research, we can also understand better how to teach our students. So with the help of longitudinal research, teachers can track their students' progress and performance, and in that way, again, maximize their learning. Specifically, in language teaching, longitudinal research places focus on understanding the acquisition, development, but also maintenance of language skills. So, not only the development and how these progress, but whether our students are able to keep having kind of at least same or similar levels of language proficiency over time. Okay, like in general education, such studies provide valuable pieces of information about the effectiveness of language teaching methods, approaches, and specific techniques that we use as teachers. So we can see whether what we are doing with our students really makes sense and if it is effective, as well as the influence of individual differences on language learning trajectories and factors that contribute to the mastery or language proficiency over time. Learning from longitudinal research in the language classroom, teachers can tailor their teaching to meet their students' needs to the best of their abilities. So again, through such research, through the longitudinal research, we can really see what works and whether these efforts are worth making. Okay, so if something works over an extended period of time, we are very likely to repeat it with our students, but also with some future students and future groups that we will teach. Longitudinal research in language teaching may involve tracking the language learning processes of individual learners, exploring the impact of instructional interventions, so different methods and topics, action research. This is something that you have already done. You're familiar with action research. So, for example, trying something out for an extended period of time and or repeating it from time to time across a term or a school year, and then analyzing its effectiveness, and finally, investigating factors that shape language acquisition. We will talk about the steps of longitudinal research in the following slides. Much like the underpinning pillars of action research, one of the main goals of longitudinal research is searching for continuous improvement in teaching and learning practices. So when you start teaching, you ought to be searching for improvements all the time, or at least the majority of time. When you start teaching, you will see that some topics, some methods or techniques, certain tasks, and so on work better with your students, or perhaps not, are not working at all, and so on. And you will keep making changes in the materials, but also in your own teaching practices. Longitudinal research, but also needs analysis, so if you remember our last session, can become a part of action research. So they both, or all three actually, rely on data collection and analysis to inform decision-making process. When you conduct research in your classroom, you collect data, you analyze it, and then you base your own practices on your findings, essentially. All these are learner-centered approaches to language teaching, which emphasize understanding and addressing students' needs, wants, and their goals. Moreover, all three place focus on teachers' continuous reflection. And again, this is something that is very important to continuously do. And this is also something that we will discuss in more details in the fourth session that we are having together. So, why is longitudinal research important in language teaching? Overall, longitudinal research plays an essential role in informing instructional practices, teaching choices, and decision-making, as well as curriculum development and policy decisions. So we can see that longitudinal research is really important. It provides further data that we can use to improve our teaching and education in general. So, longitudinal research aims to enhance and support effective language learning and teaching. And by examining language learning and teaching processes longitudinally, so over an extended periods of time, teachers can get deeper insights into the dynamic and complex nature of second or foreign language learning, and hence reach better understandings of their own students, of their own classrooms and teaching contexts. Not only does longitudinal research help teachers to identify gaps in learning, it also provides information about factors that influence learning progress in a positive way. Essentially, what works well in that particular classroom, group, teaching environment, and so on. So we don't conduct longitudinal research only to see where the gaps are, but also to draw out the positives of our own teaching practices. So if we see that across time, certain methods or topics and so on are very engaging and motivational, we are very likely to continue with such practices in our teaching. This is another stop the video and think task. So I'm really asking you to pause this video and only continue after you think about the following. Now, thinking of what you've learned so far, would you be willing to conduct longitudinal research in your own classroom? What good, if any, in your own opinion, would it bring you? So just think about this, and when you're done, you can again make notes if you want, and then you can continue listening to the video. There are different kinds of longitudinal studies and different kinds of methods or methodologies that you can employ. So you can go for a qualitative study, quantitative study, mixed method study, or you can do observations. Each of these methods have their own benefits and strengths, but also disadvantages and weaknesses. Which one you will choose really depends on what you would like to know, but also on the sources that you have at your hands. Okay? As with any kind of research, you will start with the research questions. So essentially, what is it that you want to know, that you would like to know? When you defined your research questions, you will think what can help you to find answers to this question that you have, or multiple questions if you have them. Perhaps qualitative research and going into depth, interviewing participants, analyzing their utterances to understand it deeper. would be something that you would like to do, or if you are interested more in quantities or percentages of your participants regarding a topic in question, you will pick a quantitative method, and so on and so on. As a teacher, you will know best which path to take, and don't be afraid of making mistakes and going back and forth. No research is perfect, and researchers that have a lot of experience in researching also go back and forth in analyzing and, first of all, designing their studies and so on. So this is something that you can learn on the way, and you are not supposed to know everything from the start. So don't be afraid to start, and don't be afraid, again, of making mistakes. So this is true for language learning as well. We also encourage our students to communicate, to use the language without being afraid of making mistakes. And this is also true for conducting research and teaching. Indeed, longitudinal research, as other research methods, has its own advantages and disadvantages. As we just said, nothing in this world is perfect. There's always two sides of the same coin. So let's see what this means for longitudinal research. So one of the major advantages is the ability to see and track changes, which then reveals developmental patterns over time. Okay, this is an important piece of information for a language teacher. Conducting longitudinal research allows understanding a phenomenon in depth because of the richness of data collection and the time aspect. Okay, so the fact that you are investigating something over an extended period of time, it really gives you more data than if you would do it one time only. Therefore, you already have an opportunity to understand a phenomenon in depth. Okay? Longitudinal research provides holistic, well-rounded perspectives to language teaching. Longitudinal research really offers a holistic perspective on language teaching and learning processes as well, considering the interplay of individual, social, and contextual factors over time. Teachers can also identify causal relationships between instructional practices, using materials, topics, and increased or decreased language proficiency. Okay, so teachers can really say, okay, if I do this, then students will do that. Students will be able to do that, or they won't be able to do it, and so on. So you can determine the causal relationship between what do you do and the outcome. Finally, one of the advantages of longitudinal research is that it can really inform both policy and practice. So not only you can use what you found in your own study, in your own classroom, actually, it can also inform policies. So if you conduct a study that is worthwhile sharing with a wider audience in education, do so, because policymakers could consider your study and perhaps make some changes in the curriculum. As we said, nothing is really perfect. So if there are advantages of something, we also need to consider disadvantages and what can go wrong when it comes to longitudinal research. So first of all, longitudinal research can be quite time consuming, and it requires significant commitment, which is definitely something that many teachers do not have. Teachers tend to spend a lot of time on preparation, on teaching itself, but also on correction, feedback, and so on. So employing a longitudinal or any kind of research for that matter is something that is just an additional thing that teachers have to do if they are asked to do it. So if this is voluntarily, they don't always go down this path because it can really be time consuming. It can be time consuming to conduct research, so to plan it out, to design it, and to execute it, especially over a period of time, then to analyze data and so on. So reaching final conclusions really, really takes time. Another disadvantage would be generalizability. It is an issue with many kinds of studies, and one must always be aware of it. Okay? While we cannot generalize and assume that our findings are applicable to the majority of contexts, it is indeed applicable to the context we are teaching in, which is then a good point. And I purposefully wanted to place this at the end so that we finish on a positive note, so that we don't go into negatives right at the end of the presentation. So I hope that I encouraged you to at least think about conducting research in general, first of all, but also longitudinal research in your own teaching practices once you start teaching. Finally, we reached the point where I tell you about the homework that I would like you to do for not really for the next week, but for the week when we will again see each other in synchronous settings. Okay, so I will send you the article by Ortega and Imberishi, and I would like you to read this article. As you read, I want you to write down one point, okay? You can write down more, but at least one point that was new or surprising to you. It can also be something that you learned. So 2 to 3 sentences is enough. Okay, so as you read, you might think, oh, wow, I didn't really think about this, I didn't know this, and so on. So write down this at least one point in 2 to 3 sentences, and I will ask you to bring your notes with you in the session 4, which is on the 19th of April. Please don't forget, because I will ask several students to read what they wrote. Okay, so tell me about the points that were new or surprising to them. And just so you know in advance, if I don't get volunteers, I will ask randomly. So do prepare 2 to 3 sentences that you could read aloud to me and to your colleagues in the class of 19th of April. So that's it for today. I am very grateful for your attention and for listening to this video, and I will see you very soon. And until then, I will release another video for you that you will listen to the same way as you did with this one. And I really look forward to seeing you in about 2 weeks. Bye!